Shalom, brethren. Welcome all. So, it's kind of crazy in the world right now, and we have to take responsibility as the body of Christ. So, I wasn't keeping track of time because I'm dealing with a way to bring that to light and to use the evil of the world to shine light on it, to shame it and disgrace it. The church went far too long without disgracing evil enough, and it's gotten to this without shaming evil enough. And it's time that we really shame it and don't downplay the shaming it. Because when we downplay the shaming it, we're kind of saying like, yeah, you're right. It's not as bad as we think it is, you know? So, and however you don't downplay it is up to you, you know? I mean, yeah. So, last episode, I won't do the whole rundown. Well, I'll do the whole rundown of everything real quick. Let me get myself off camera. So, the whole rundown of everything. Yeah, you see our background is like a dark world. That's like this rabbit hole we're in. Am I using the less dark version? I am. So what's going on here is Rome is the whore. CJ has provided plenty of evidence of that in the first 2 episodes. And she wants communion. And then Rome basically has been doing power plays through written agreements that we outlined in episode 3 regarding the temple, regarding old Israel and all of the holy sites, including the Temple Mount, and getting into a position to be the one who would guide military action regarding such matters. And then in China, the same sort of thing was going on, and the Catholic Church was being really careful. But then suddenly, the communists put them in a tough situation, and they had a Jesuit Antichrist, that is a Jesuit Pope, who sold out the Catholics in China and many, many other people to an extremely atrocious, brutal regime. And we went over that document yesterday. So that was the plot twist in China. And then I called today's episode something like, I don't remember off the top of my head, something about China, Chinese schemes, yes. So, because I think we're going to talk a bit about China doing things in other parts of the world, if I remember right, CJ.
Yeah, you get a little, the article, the audience may recall, the article we ended with last night, or yesterday rather, we kind of read the very beginning of the Breitbart article claiming that there was a Chinese whistleblower who was actually saying that the government in China, specifically the Communist Party, was paying off the Vatican with bribe money. And the article not only went out, to explain that, which is, of course, very vital to what we're talking about, but also went on to talk about some of which we did not actually get to. We'll get to it today, just in case the audience is a little confused right now. Went on to discuss that China is doing the same things with like Australia, and I believe there was a couple other nations they had mentioned there as well, but I am not remembering them off the top of my head. I think New Zealand was one of them. A couple nations in Europe. And there's some other things that, since we're going to get into this, that we should also get into as well, because they do come into play with this idea of globalism. To be specific, so that you guys know what I'm going to be getting to, and then, of course, Brother Nicholas, I'll have, once we're done with this Breitbart article, I'll be sending you the actual articles there. But there is a initiative in China known as the One Belt, One Road initiative. It is a globalist initiative, and what I mean by that is not that it is a initiative that is coming up from a bunch of higher ups in some kind of a cabal. I honestly think when it comes to globalism, I think there are numerous groups that would like to establish global power. I don't think any of them have yet. That's why I think when, it's very easy for us to point out the whore, because that is very clearly the Vatican. it's harder to point out the beast because I don't think the beast system is complete yet.
Brother, isn't the reserve banking system, while it's not without exception on the globe yet, it is very global and very singular, yeah?
Nearly, yes. It is. There is, I think, 3 nations that are not currently run by our global banking system. And there's a couple countries.
There used to be like 6, and then we went to a war with a couple of them and stuff and changed that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the one that I remember off the top of my head is Iraq, right? Because Saddam Hussein was actually, for all of his flaws, one of the good things about him was that he was very skeptical of the idea of central banking. And, you know, obviously he was a terrible person for numerous other reasons, and that's the excuses we used to get rid of him. But when we got rid of him, we also allowed central banking to take over Iraq. And now, if I'm not mistaken, I believe the only nations that are not controlled by a central banking system are North Korea and Iran. Potentially Syria, but I'm not sure about that.
Okay, well, I mean, we'll look more into that some other time because that's widely known stuff. And we're just talking about it generally, and generally we're very correct here.
Well, and one of the things that'll be, because I think that's a highly, important piece to this puzzle, but I don't think it's the only thing, right? Because a global economic power it's a big deal, right? But it's not quite the deal. And to give you an example, I'll use the European Union, right? When the European Union was first founded in the 1940s, right after World War II, late 1940s, it was only an economic union. And that did mean these nations in Europe gave up a lot of their sovereignty, namely to the euro as a concept, right? So the Greeks and the French are going to use the same currency and therefore the same economic system. It wasn't until the 80s and 90s that the European Union started to become actually something that could dictate policy, like your open borders, like the human rights and, having its high courts judge over different nations and so on and so forth. By the time we got to the 2010s, the European Union was even asking for a military, which in my opinion, a military is the final step to completing a governmental system like that, because it allows you at that point to enforce your will upon those who may or may not agree with you. If we take that same concept, the beginning portion of the global system, namely that banking system, that's almost entirely completed, with the exception of a couple nations, which again, I pointed out what I believe those are, but I might be wrong about that. But you're slowly seeing the rest of those things build up also. And one of those things that we'll see, which will add not only to the economic portion of it, but also the cultural portion of it, because it's going to help a lot with things like trade and immigration and things like that, which, obviously there's positives to that, but then we're going to be looking at the negatives because of, looking at it from the globalist perspective. That is the One Belt, One Road initiative. And we'll get more into it later on, just because I do want to read the Breitbart article. But to give you guys an idea, basically, the Chinese government has established a plan where they will build a highway, a literal highway, from Beijing to London, encompassing, I think, 50 different countries that it'll go through, including but not limited to Iraq and Syria. And there are some who believe it may actually be the fruition of prophecy, because there is prophecy, I believe, in Ezekiel, if I'm not mistaken, but I'll pull up the actual reference once we get there, of the Euphrates River being dried up so that men may march over it. I
was saying just yesterday that the Euphrates thing, like, not that I claim to be ready to know how to interpret it, but the impression I got was that it might have something to do with the West, and its drying up might have something to do with the dominance of the East coming forth.
Well, and that could very well be, because that is something that China is easily trying to establish. And it is interesting, because if that is the case, then that will be met. We talked about how the natural types the spiritual. that will be met with a literal drying of the Euphrates as well, with this road that crosses over the Euphrates. So it'll literally dry the Euphrates in the sense that they dry it so that they can, or create dry patches so that they can create a road over it. And then it'll, sort of in a more symbolic sense, dry the Euphrates in that the West is now collapsing at the hands of the East.
Wait, what do you mean dry patches? They'll make bridges. What am I missing?
Well, my understanding of the plan, if I am understanding what their plan is correctly, is that the project itself might actually end up being big enough that they might just literally cut through the river itself rather than building a bridge over it.
I don't understand cutting through a river. If I'm to be honest, are they going to use the river as the highway?
Well, no. So
it seems a lot more difficult to dry up a river and cut through it than it does to make a bridge over it. I guess you have to dry it up temporarily to make the bridge. Perhaps, I don't know.
Well, and we'll be able to look at the specific details of it with the article.
Well, even just making a bridge, even if they just dry it up to make a bridge, that still dries the Euphrates.
Well, and the thing that I would kind of point out too, just to give a brief idea, right, is there is, history of humans using water, specifically rivers, as power plants, right? And included in this One Belt One Road initiative is not only the creation of this road, but of numerous power plants, of some artificial cities, of new ports. It's a quite complex plan, actually. And like I said, you'll see all the details once we pull up the article.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, it is actually a quite complicated plan. And actually, to be fair, as evil as the Chinese government is, I will admit it is quite brilliant. It's terrifying and it's brilliant in a way that is evil. But the man you see on your screen there, the Grand Poobah himself, Xi Jinping, he's not a dummy. He's an evil man, but he's not a dummy. But at any rate, the article we want to get into today, well, they're both going to be today, but at first, is this whistleblower claims Chinese communists pay Vatican $2 billion in bribes. And of course, like I said, we were looking at that towards the end of yesterday's episode. Kind of read I believe we just read the headline, right? We might have read the sort of highlighted beginning portion as well, but I think we just read the highline.
Yeah, we came to this part right here at the very least. I think we also came to this part, but let's just start at the beginning. Do you hear that background noise?
I don't think I do right now. Is it still going on?
Yeah, so at its very loudest, you guys will hear it a little bit. That's not too bad. Okay. Cool.
All righty.
The lawn's being mowed.
Wow.
I live with my parents, and I'm not allowed to help them with any of that stuff because that's how they keep themselves fit in their old age. So I get to focus on this stuff, which is good. Huh?
I was just saying, I certainly understand that. My dad is super similar to that, although I imagine my dad's probably a little bit younger than your parents just because I'm a little bit younger than you are.
Yeah, and I'm the youngest child, so my parents are very old for my age. So, okay, let's get into the article.
All righty. So, from Rome, Breitbart's Rome department, exiled Chinese dissident Guo Wengui alleged this weekend that Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, allocates $2 billion with a B dollars a year to pay off the Vatican for its silence concerning Chinese atrocities. And remember, just to give you guys a brief idea, right, of the atrocities, we had talked about them yesterday. So if you want to go a little bit whole hog, watch yesterday's episode, of course. But, it's things like putting people in camps, editing the Bible, attacking preachers and burning down churches, and so on and so forth, right? In a June 20th interview on the War Room, Mr. Guo said that the CCP earmarks massive sums each year to win the allegiances of foreign countries, including the Vatican, Italy, and Australia. It's interesting, of course, that it's the Vatican as well as Italy, the nation which is bordering on every side the Vatican. I do find that to be a little bit interesting. I also want to point out when people in American news are telling you about such and such a politician seems to have a pro-Chinese bent, this is very probably why. I can't say that definitively because we don't know definitively. But I think it is reasonable for us to be suspicious that somebody who might have a pro-Chinese bent could potentially be receiving Chinese bribes. Think of Michael Bloomberg or a Hillary Clinton.
I mean, it's just so sick. The idea of prioritizing one's own income over like these big things that affect everyone, that's just sick.
It is. And on the top of that, it's very deadly to the soul because, there's a lot of Chinese Christians who are still going to be Chinese Christians regardless because the Catholic Church has no power over them, right? However, right, let's assume that this nation will continue on for the next 30 years, just for the sake of argument, right? 30 years from now, a 14-year-old kid who was born 16 years after the Bible was edited starts turning into the Bible, right? And he believes this is the Word of God, and hopefully there's something inside him, so the Holy Spirit actually leads him to say, "Hey, this Bible you're reading, this is not a Bible. This is a Bible in name only," right? But it's very likely that this person, he reads that and that's all he knows now, right? The same way that somebody looks into the Quran and that's all they know now, and the government's won't allow them to learn anything different.
And yesterday we mentioned that like this is the same thing Rome has done over and over ever since the Council of Nicaea. This exact same tactic that in Europe it was like Rome was the Chinese government. And this is what happened with the church. And now China's the Chinese government. And I mean, Rome's already involved with this, but now it's happening again. And then, my brain just kind of hooted out on that. Probably because the lawnmower stopped and changed my train of thought.
Well, and if I may, one thing I would add to that too is, there is a good deal of power that the Vatican is getting from these deals they're making with China, including this, not only this money, but their sole control over all religious matters in China. They are the only legitimate game in town, not the Dalai Lama, no Protestants, no Anglicans, no Muslims. There is one group that the Chinese government is cool with having their religious liberties, and that's Catholics, specifically Catholics who are willing to fall under the provisional agreement.
Well, that's because there is no liberty in it, and that's the whole point. And then
exactly.
Not only that, but it's like Rome every time throughout the ages has just done the things like you were just talking about. They'll have a Bible, and it won't really be the Bible, and it'll be hidden from them, right? That's what Rome has always been doing, hiding Christ instead of showing him.
Exactly. Remember the Gutenberg press, right? What made Martin Luther's 95 Theses such a big deal in the first place? It wasn't that he was the first one to call out the Catholic Church. It was that he had a printing press so he could actually print the Bible and give it to the German people. The German people didn't have a Bible in their language before that, right? Because the church wanted to make sure that they had control over it. When we look at that, we do have to realize, right, this is probably the most Chinese-centric episode, even though the last three have been about China and the Vatican. This one will focus more specifically on the Chinese side. But you do have to recall, right, these Chinese government, whether they know it or not, they're giving a lot of power over to the Catholic Church, especially considering some of the stuff the Catholic Church does, such as disregarding its own doctrines for the sake of evangelizing, which that'll probably be our next episode because that is probably something we won't be able to get into in this. But to give you guys a brief idea so that you have a teaser, look up the Amazonian Synod and you will see exactly what I am talking about. But nonetheless, I'll get back to the article unless you had something else you wanted to say, Brother Nicholas.
Nope.
So among them, the Vatican receives up to $2 billion from the Chinese Communist Party every year, he said, and he is Mr. Guo. The Chinese Communist Party allocates $2 billion each year to gain influence. I guess that's the end of the quote there. To gain influence over the Vatican's internal policy making and pay for its silence on the CCP's repression of religious freedom, said the controversial billionaire whistleblower. I gotta be honest, I didn't know there were billionaires in China. That's a interesting thought. Nonetheless, we continue.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's billionaires in China. I mean, all that money that they have of our debt is in the hands of businesses, and then there's people involved in that too. And people talk a lot about how China's actually capitalist, especially when they want to like defend socialism.
Right. Well, and to be fair, there is there's a brief, fact we should mention there, which is kind of terrifying. Capitalism is the freest economic system you could find, but the Chinese government has shown that you can blend communism and capitalism in such a way that gives you economic power while maintaining communistic dictatorship, and that should be a terrifying fact for everybody.
Yeah, and what that is it's because fascism, as far as I can tell, if we really get to the spiritual core of what it is, it's that word is mostly used to define government dominance by absolutely dominating market. So government and business have to integrate into one in that case. And then socialism does it by destroying the market. So it's almost like socialism was just an excuse to like get full control to establish fascism was the way they did it, because fascism is much more productive than socialism. So the fascism they're using, the market dominance they're using, is going to help them globalize, whereas socialism would never help them globalize because it doesn't produce.
Yeah, and I've often said, if from an economic standpoint at least, fascism is the communism that works. By which I mean the economy will stand up. It's not going to work in any of the other ways.
Right? By which you mean exactly what I just said, maybe.
Exactly, right. It keeps the economy running, whereas in socialism the economy just collapses.
Yeah, socialism is a good way to usher in like greater fascism, because you like destroy things, then build it back up outside of the hands of the people with more scheming, more control from scheming. The more control there is from scheming, the more it gets into this whole. Anyway, yeah. So I mean, this whole Marxists versus fascists nonsense or whatever. Like, not only is it two flip sides of the same coin, but we're not even trying to find out what side of the coin it is. They just want to spend the whole coin.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and last note before I get back to the article, I do just want to point out, you hinted to something there very important. Benito Mussolini, who is the first real fascist politician in world history, as far as modern fascism is concerned, at least, because of course, there's these spirits never really, are reborn in a sense. They kind of just continue on. Ecclesiastes is very, strong about saying nothing really changes, but nonetheless, Benito Mussolini was a socialist for a very, very long period of time. He only stopped being a socialist precisely because of what me and you were talking about. He thought that the socialism was, it basically, A, didn't go far enough, and B, created a system that was not tenable. So he wanted to make it more tenable. But with that said, back to the article here. Guo has previously stated that China has drafted a complete strategy for world domination known by the initials BGY, which stands for blue, control of the internet, gold, buy influence with money, and yellow, seduce key people with sex. And of course, right now, notice when we're making this claim that the Vatican and the Chinese government are, linked with each other at the hip, then when you hear all this kind of stuff, even if it's only to a limited extent, the Vatican is somewhat involved, even if it's only in the silence, which of course I think we've shown that it's a little bit more than that, at least, right? With their wanting to have control over certain cathedrals and having their religious dominance in the nation and so on and so forth.
Well, what's so interesting about this is that it's hard to believe that someone would make this up, because I feel like if someone was making this up, they're not going to put in yellow, seduce key people with sex. I mean, it sounds kind of like far-fetched far-fetched or something that would be one of these three key pieces of the strategy. But at the same time, we know that was the stumbling block that was it it was someone named what are the names? I know there's Balaam, the stumbling block of Balaam. There's two of them. Is it Balak and Balaam or something? So anyway, when they sent women to seduce Israel,
right, in Midian,
so that they would
That's Balaam, you're right.
so that Israel would be in sin enough that it would bring curse upon them. And unfortunately, with the seduce key people with sex, I mean, it's not only, I mean, key people, and it's interesting that like by influence with money, so control the internet, that's mind control. By influence with money, but then like for a lot of people, the end game of money is just sex anyway, and they're not necessarily wanting to buy like prostitutes or whatever, so you can like seduce them with people and get influence too. I mean, it's just good. But then when we see this movie Cuties, it's sort of like they also want to use sex in the mind control of populations, you know? I'm not saying Cuties is coming from China, but this whole how important using sex is. You know, I don't think people are as hypersexualized as we think people are. It's just growing up with TV piping in increasing sexualization every single decade to more and more of the world all the time. And growing up in that as a child, like we have no idea what it was like to not have like sexuality piped into our faces growing up as kids. And so like we think that our level of sexual temptation and stuff is normal and all that. And I think it's probably by far globally by far the worst it's ever been in human history, in that what's normal is really like a whole lot more, I'll call it laid back, you know, like less forceful of temptation on us, you know, that's like drugged into us as an addiction growing up. And then they can use that addiction just like, you know, when someone gets addicted to crack, it's like, well, keep coming back to me. And every time you manage to get a little something from stealing, give it to me and I'll give you some of this worthless stuff I cooked up that you're addicted to. Or it's even like, hey, I'll get you to be a prostitute and make me money now that you're on it, you know? And it's the exact same thing with this seducing the world with sex. It's a drug. They're turning us into these zombies. I mean, I was talking to a guy for the past 24 hours about regarding this Cuties thing. And it's pretty obvious to me that just because Jen Aldrich shows her boobies that he is like, well, that's one possibility. He's just super determined to defend that because he's addicted to his sexual thoughts and he wants to think they're right. But at the same time, his avatar is like a little banana stuffed animal, or a little monkey stuffed animal with a giant banana with like its mouth on the tip of the banana. And after the whole discussion and every single time, he was just like, well, we could have a good conversation. I told him, I was like, I'm not doing this to find conversations and stuff. And like, he never once addressed, even mentioned that, okay, well, I can see where you're coming from because child molestation is really bad, but you're still being a jerk or something. He never once addressed anything like that. He was just obsessed with himself, with me, like talking to him nicely, even though he's promoting child molestation and stuff. It was really nuts. And so this whole strategy of Balaam and the wisdom we have in the Bible, you know, shows us that this makes perfect sense. Like this is a key strategy if you want to affect large groups of people. And it has been for ages, and it's far more powerful now in the age of like piping media into your face all the time. You know, those are the crystal balls of the witchcraft to mind control, you know? So it's like piping the mind control at you all the time. And this is so dangerous because, I mean, I'm really disappointed that people won't just like stop for a week and put all their spare time into opposing Cuties. Like you know, however many of us are adults in this country, 250 million or more or whatever. And yeah, that's all we have to do, you know. Everyone just has to do a little bit. Just purely speak up on it, you know. Yeah, I'll put the links inside chat while Brother CJ goes on, where you can at least sign a survey that goes to the Supreme Court and FBI, and then you can report it to a group that reports the child pornography to the police. And I'll also put a third link, which is my video, where I show what I wrote in my report as an example. So sorry to interrupt with that, but
No, you're fine. I would point out that, you know, not only is what you're saying true, but there are 3 examples I would use from the scripture and 1 example from our modern age to just show how true it is, right? From the scripture I'd use, right, who are some of the biggest deceivers, other than, of course, the obvious, like Lucifer, in the Bible. Well, it's Jezebel, a man's wife, who is obviously, you know, in a way has seduced Ahab to her ways, right? Delilah, once again, same thing. And like you just mentioned, the women in Balaam, right? The Bible, it warns about this constantly, and there's a reason for it. Human beings are kind of, you know, you bring up how you know, sex is really similar to like something like crack cocaine or heroin, right? But it's actually a little bit worse. And what I mean by that is human beings are by default born addicted to sex, just like all animals that reproduce are. I don't think we're animals in the sense that, you know, I should say all living creatures.
well,
We're all kind of born. So,
animals is a fine enough word because non-animal creatures don't.
right.
I mean, we're speaking in a strictly biologic, categorical sense.
Exactly, and thank you for understanding what I meant there. When you think of it that way, right? And this is part of the reason I believe that God does stress, you know, a level of sexual morality as much as He does. On top of the fact that I think, you know, sex is actually a very deeply spiritual thing. I mean, there's a reason why you have such a firm and strong relationship with your spouse and don't with other people. Right. And that's not the only reason, of course, but it's certainly a part of it. But that being said, much like something like food, or, you know, some of these other sorts of, you know, guilty pleasures, if you will, it's one of those things that humans are born addicted to. And so when you start to be fed, whether it's in the form of a Delilah seducing you or in the form of, you know, Cardi B's music, or whatever it happens to be, when you start getting fed this thing that your body already has a predisposition to crave anyways, right? It becomes a lot worse to deal with. And there's psychological tests that actually go into this, right? How pornography addiction, as an example, can be as hard, if not harder to break than heroin addiction. And I mean, a lot of people think like, wow, you got to be kidding me. That's something I would have never thought of. But if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. You came out of the womb having the biological, you know, puzzle pieces, if you will, that would eventually be set up to make you a sexual being. It takes a while. It takes something like 14, 15, 16 years for you to actually complete your pubescency stages, right? But that was in you straight out of the womb, even before the womb, just like it was in you to, you know, think consciously about things or to eat things or so on and so forth, right? It's just a normal thing that human beings do. And when you think of it from that perspective, that really makes it the most dangerous drug, at least in my own opinion. Because any human being who separates themselves from God and puts this stuff in front of themselves will fall into the addiction. I don't even believe it's possible. If you have to deal with it and it's in front of you, but the Lord is with you, I think that you can do it. If the Lord is not with you, but you don't put yourself in front of it, I think you can do it. But if the Lord is not with you and you put yourself in front of it, I am telling you, you will fall because you're a person. That's the way persons are. And that makes this incredibly, incredibly dangerous. And I would point out, I use the 3 biblical examples. Here's an example from our modern world to show you how this is being used, and that's Jeffrey Epstein, right? How did Jeffrey Epstein accumulate all the power that he did? Nobody really knows, but we all have a sneaking suspicion it has something to do with that island he had off in the Caribbean, right? That's this exact same thing. It's this making sure that you have control over people because of their sexual urges. It's a very, very carnal way of thinking, but unfortunately it works. And the fact that it works is...
Did anyone else see or read that story, The Most Dangerous Game, in like junior high?
Yeah, with the 100...
Like, that is not appropriate for public school at all in any shape, way, or form. And it's just totally standard. Like, all this stuff with cuties and stuff and all this evil of the world has just been coming a long time. And anyone who's just still looking at it and kind of approves of the world, that is really sick. This has come to such a sick place that literally people are brought into a very powerful form of delusion and insanity. And Christ is the only freedom from that. And it's obvious in so many ways.
Amen. It really is. It really is. And we time is limited, right? Time is limited for us here on this. Even, I believe that the end is coming soon. I am an Adventist in that regard, not in as far as like being part of a church, but the word Adventist means you believe that Christ's coming is imminent. I do believe that. That said, though, I mean, even if it doesn't, time is still limited, right? We are seeing the things that happen right before nations collapse. And we need to know that.
Time, right? Just as a cycle of history. That's what you're about to get at?
Yeah, exactly. Even if this isn't the end of the age, it's definitely like we're getting close to the end of America, I think. I think that's almost undisputable at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of hopeful this stuff's nonsensical enough that there might be a bounce back and they might have to do one more phase or something. And,
hey, it's happened before, right? Like, let's pray, because it has happened before.
And so, yeah, I think everyone follows that. So let's get back to the article if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. So since 2014, the CCP has formulated internal policies to invest a certain percentage of trade with foreign countries in the BGY program to erode the local state system, Guo said Saturday. And the current BGY quota for the United States is 5%. Right? Now, remember when we were just talking about a little bit earlier about those politicians who kind of have a pro-Chinese bent and people like have suspected that they may actually be on a Chinese payroll? Well, it's not, proof. Don't get me wrong. This is still a theory, but this is some solid evidence that suggests that may very well be the case. And we all know that that's not a crazy idea. I mean, people pay off people. The mob, it's one of the common mob tactics, right? That's how it works. According to data from the U.S. Trade Office, the total trade volume between China and the United States in 2018 was $7.37 trillion. By the way, that's $7.37 trillion with Trump's tariffs, because let's point out that there's been trade wars going on since Trump was inaugurated. It wasn't immediately, but it was in his first year. So, I mean, you can see even with tariffs and trade wars, we still have a huge trade volume with China, $7.37 trillion, right? Guo also offered a similar calculation for Australia. Quote, the trade volume between the CCP and Australia is about 200 billion, which, by the way, that is still a huge number, but I just want to point out, you guys can do the math for yourself. I'm not going to actually do it, but how many times does 200 billion go into 7.37 trillion, right?
36.
That was solid.
36.85.
That was impressive, Brother Nicholas. I'm impressed.
Hopefully I got that decimal right. I think I did.
Excuse me. Quote, previously 1% was used for BGY, but it rose to 5%. That is 10 billion used for BGY, which, by the way, and we will have to get the number now for the 5% of 7.37 trillion, because that'll give you a calculation as to how much the Chinese government is actually spending on BGY in America. So just a moment.
Yeah, 36.85. That is correct.
That is solid. So, I mean, there you go, right there. That gives you the idea of
actually it's 38.885 is the exact number.
That is just honestly, that's still kind of ridiculously close. I am pretty impressed with that. That was right off the top of your head too.
Yeah, it's just what? Because you were saying something about 5%.
Yeah, that So just to give you kind of an idea, right, of the
the two on. Yeah, I don't even remember how I did that math, but I did it. Let's go on. I was just having fun. I'm interrupting the show.
Hey, all good. You see that though? That's $36 billion, right? That people are using on bribes for the U.S. $2 billion on bribes for the Vatican. It says here previously 1% for BGY rose to 5%. That's $10 billion used for BGY, and he's talking about Australia. Already we're at $58 billion that the Chinese government is spending every year bribing foreign nations, right? And just to recall, right, just so everybody's aware, in our previous episodes, we have shown now that this is not something that the Vatican is unaware of, right? You can make arguments for these other countries because countries that are democratically electing people have different camps in their government, right? That's something we always have to acknowledge. Sometimes some camps are actually supporting a certain agenda and other camps are not. Just as a perfect example, I think we would be hard pressed to make a case that Trump is somehow pro-China. He certainly isn't. That said, that doesn't mean that they're not spending $36.8 billion bribing politicians in America, right? It just may not be Donald Trump. It may be, and this is the total hypothetical, I'm not blaming anyone, but Michael Bloomberg. I actually doubt that because he's a billionaire, but nonetheless, right? You get the idea. It could be somebody else is the point. In the Vatican, though, that's not the same because the Pope is an autocrat. He's a theocratic monarch, right? So there is no democracy there. There's one camp in the Vatican. There's multiple camps in the Catholic Church, but in the Vatican itself, there is one camp. At this current point, that camp is the Jesuit camp.
Yeah, so you're saying that at the moment it's like united with the whole Jesuit thing. They're not really able to do anything about it much at the time. So it's more like a different era would have to try to fix it.
Exactly. And to give
probably can't. How do you fix this? Well, just real quick, I'll tell you guys simply how I did it. The 200 billion goes into a trillion 5 times. So you just multiply 7.37 by 5. And at first I did 7.3. And then when I added this 7 part to it, that's where I got the more precise result. So that's all that was. It was pretty easy. Just a trick.
For sure.
They're bribing everyone like crazy. And then you're saying that the Jesuits have gotten this spot. And so yeah, how can they do it? How could they undo the damage the Jesuits are doing right now, even if someone else gets in power in the Vatican?
Exactly. Which, and who knows if that'll happen too, because, Pope Francis might die and pass it on to someone else. There's a lot of people who think that he may end up being the last pope of an era. I don't think that the Catholic Church will literally fall. I think it's kind of too big to fail until Christ comes, if I'm being honest. Plus, I believe it's the horror revelation. But there is something to be said about a potential schism in the Catholic Church. We'll get to that on another episode because it's the one saving grace for the Catholic Church, in my opinion, is that they could potentially split. And if they do split, much like the Great Schism and the Protestant Reformation, they'll have an opportunity to return to Christianity. However, if they do end up going the way of the Great Schism and the Protestant Reformation, then they're just going to go right back to Mother Whore, right? Because that's what all the Protestant churches did, and that's what the Orthodox churches did. Anyways, sorry, that was a little bit of a tangent.
No, that was fine. I'm going to finish my tangent. My number was right the first time. I'm not sure why I added the 7 in a second time. I can't. So it is 36.85. I was distracted talking to you, so I got confused later. But my first answer was correct. I just put it in a calculator real quick.
Well, and you know what? I think I actually,
now you see how it's pretty easy to get that.
yeah. Kind of looking at the math there. That's
what's fun, right? It's like it's sort of like just this bit of a puzzle, and then the math is easy enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I like that kind of thing.
Well, and so to jump back here onto the article, just because I do want to
follow these bribes.
Yeah, exactly. And I apologize if I'm kind of like pausing at certain points. I am still getting over a small sickness. At this point, it's really nothing more than just the kind of foggy brain you get. But I hope that I'm not, actually sounding foggy. I feel foggy, but
no, you're doing good. Yeah, I'm the one who distracted with something totally off topic.
Well, I appreciate that, brother. I also appreciate the distraction though, because that was we did get the number there, and that's solid, right?
Yeah, and then because I was I didn't focus enough. I would have saved time by like not dividing my attention. But let's go on.
All righty. So, getting back to the
according to Guo,
these huge amounts of BGY funds are employed for a variety of uses, including bribing local officials, regulating media messaging, and controlling local resources.
1 second. What does BGY stand for?
BGY is the blue, gold, yellow.
Oh, right. Yes. Okay, so this is very key. This is the blue is control the information, the gold is influence with money, and the yellow is seduce key people with sex. Okay, so we have our heads right in it again. So we were just looking at money a moment ago, right?
Right.
And then these huge amounts of funds are employed for a variety of uses, including bribing local officials, money, regulating media messaging, and controlling local resources. So the media messaging is the internet thing, the blue.
Exactly. And
right, so the gold.
And just to kind of, remind the audience to, as the point we're trying to, make here as far as the Vatican. So that means that the Vatican, according to Mr. Guo, at least, who's a Chinese whistleblower from the Chinese Communist Party, is accepting $2 billion in bribes every year so that Vatican officials not only can have, their silence on issues such as the Holocaust of Christians and Muslims and stuff like that, but on top of that, so that they can bribe local officials, regulate media messaging, and control local resources. Right? That's a pretty big deal, I would think. I noticed.
And how is is local resources the end goal of BGY, which is why it's not one of the 3 strategies?
Well, I think the absolute end goal of BGY is hegemony, which is just a fancy way of saying influence without necessarily having it to be military. Hegemony is, in my opinion, the most dangerous form of empire because it doesn't appear to be empire. America currently has a hegemony, where technically our borders end at the United States. But if you looked at us objectively, we really are an empire. China aims to be that, right?
So would but how come controlling resources isn't one of the 3? It seems that is the body of hegemony. That's the body of the goal, is to have the control for the resources. So it's not a strategy because it's the end goal. Or does that? Or it also feeds into the financial side of the strategy, of course. Oh, and if the local resources are media resources, it feeds into that side.
Right. See, actually, you just got it perfectly, right? That's the BGY. It's not that they don't want the natural resources. It's that the BGY will end up including the natural resources almost by default, right?
Okay.
A 2019 report released by International Cyber Policy Center at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute revealed hundreds of Twitter accounts linked to the state-backed efforts to denigrate pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong had formerly been used to target critics of the Chinese government, principally Guo Wengui, who is, of course, the person who we are having the whistleblowing here from. The accounts were...
wait, let me get my head on that. That was kind of a giant sentence, huh? 2019 report released by the International Cyber Policy Center at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute revealed hundreds of Twitter accounts linked to the state-backed effort to denigrate pro-democracy protests. Okay, so Australian Strategic Policy Institute. So Australia is concerned about this stuff. That's why they have the closest eyes on it, for good reason. The state-backed... So hundreds of Twitter accounts linked to the state-backed effort to denigrate pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong had formerly been used to target critics of the Chinese government. So the same accounts were formerly being used for one specific thing, then for another similar specific thing. Principally Guo Wengui, so he was one of these hundreds of accounts, or is he the report, or... reported.
I believe he's one of the critics being targeted.
Okay. In Hong Kong had formerly been used to target critics of the Chinese government, principally Guo Wengui. Okay. I follow. Yeah, you're right. So they're saying that those were targeting him before they were targeting the protests.
Exactly. And of course, he's just to remind the audience, he's the whistleblower who is reporting this stuff.
Yeah, whistleblower, Chinese billionaire, who eventually came to the conclusion that he could no longer have his own income be a higher priority than everybody on Earth.
Right, because, and by the way, I don't know where the state of his soul is, but let me just say that is just what you should do as a man, as a human being, right? As somebody who believes that you act ethically. Now, I have a sneaking suspicion he probably does have some sort of a religious reason for that, because I think it's very difficult for people when they're outside of Christ to make these kinds of decisions. But even if he didn't, right, that's still an example of how people should deal with this kind of stuff. Your own income is not worthy in any way, shape, or form of being compared to the good that is done by standing up to people like the Chinese Communist government, which, of course, for him means something much different than for us, right? Because in the end, the Chinese Communist government doesn't have any power over me right now. Mr. Guo, on the other hand, is one of their citizens, right? So he made a very big choice, and I commend him for it. The accounts were part of a coordinated information campaign operating for more than 2 years to target Mr. Guo, as well as jailed publisher Gui Minhai. Quote, those early efforts are an attempt to shape sentiment and the international narrative around these prominent critics of the Chinese government, and to shape them in such a way as to influence the Chinese diaspora, which diaspora means basically all of the people who are outside of the homeland, to influence the Chinese diaspora's perception of these individuals, end quote, says Jake Wallace, one of the reporter's chief authors. So in other words, those early efforts that they were talking about were meant to be kind of a propaganda campaign for Chinese citizens, or Chinese people rather, who were not necessarily within the borders of China or citizens of China. And to give an example of that, just to be brief, think the Jewish people, right? There's something over 1 million Jewish people in New York. That's an example of a diaspora, right? They're not from Israel. They don't live in Israel. Many of them aren't even citizens of Israel, but they are still Jews. That's an example of a diaspora. For its part, the Vatican has been carrying on a charm offensive with the CCP for several years, and in September 2018 signed an important secret accord with Beijing concerning the appointment of Catholic bishops in China.
And if we can try to actually say words when they show just letters, that might be helpful for the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. CCP is Chinese Communist Party. Just so you
Yeah,
guys
so,
are
so charm offensive with the Chinese Communist Party for several years. Um, are you able to translate that a little bit?
Yeah, so does anybody recall, I'm sure we all do because it was very, very recently. When Trump was speaking with Kim Jong-un, right, trying to make peace over there, and a lot of people in the States had a big problem with the way Trump went about it because he was, oh, Kim Jong-un really cares about his people, and Kim Jong-un is this great ruler. He's a strong dude, all this other kind of stuff. You know what I mean? In other words, he was trying to appeal to Kim Jong-un, right? Trying to get on his good side. You could put that another way and say he was carrying on a charm offensive, right? Because Trump had an agenda. That agenda was peace between North Korea and South Korea, right? As well as some level of denuclearization for the nation of North Korea. And in order to achieve that agenda, what he did is try to charm Kim Jong-un into basically trusting him, right? That's what the Vatican is doing in China, right? They are charming the Chinese government, saying, we totally are willing to let you, edit the Bible and appoint certain priests, or at least make sure that they're approved by you, and have state operating priests and so on and so forth. We're totally fine with that. You guys are all good there. The Chinese communist priests are totally patriots and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? And as a result, the Chinese Communist Party gets a little bit closer to like, oh, okay, maybe we can concede this, maybe we can concede that. I mean, think about 15 years ago, right? Nobody on the entire planet, Pope Benedict himself included, and probably Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio. I can't remember if he was a cardinal yet at that time, but nonetheless, he was at least a priest, right? That's Pope Francis's original name. Nobody would have ever thought that Catholicism would be legal in China, right? And yet here we are, and it is. And so you see that the Vatican's charm offensive, it is working. It's just
more. Just a quick pause there. Because he was probably at least a bishop, if not a cardinal. But he was also a Jesuit. And it's like he probably had some idea that they were trying to do this and that they might make it happen.
Well, and that's fair because the Jesuits, I mean, people, they want to talk about Illuminatis and stuff like that. And a lot of times that's just bogus people making bogus claims. But the Jesuits are like a real life Illuminati kind of group. You know what I mean? I mean, they are a creepy organization. Even a lot of Catholics don't trust the Jesuits.
Weren't Jesuits banned from certain things for a long time in the Catholic Church?
Yeah, and there used to be sort of a rule of thumb. I don't know if it was ever official doctrine, but there used to be a rule of thumb that a Jesuit cannot be the Pope either. Kind of like one of those unspoken rules, right? Obviously, that's not the case now because Pope Francis. But, there's always been, even within the Catholic Church, a very healthy distrust of the Jesuit order. And by the way,
we see how like the light of Christ holds back their attempts, but then unfortunately, that's the direction Rome's going, regardless of having to take time to overcome the truth, And Rome has to do that because they couldn't beat them, so they joined them. So they have to play games with themselves now,
Well, and exactly, and I would point out too to every Catholic watching, you will have to make a choice at some point. Are you for the Catholic Church or are you for the Scriptures? Because the Catholic Church is not only against the Scriptures, they're against you. They sell you, the Catholic individual, out to foreign governments in the name of increasing their own power, right? If this church is truly led by the Holy Spirit, then you're saying that is a Holy Spirit move. And honestly, you're going to have to make an ultimate decision at some point. Every Catholic on this planet will have to make an ultimate decision at some point. Is that what I believe? Or do I believe what comes out of the Scriptures themselves? Do I really believe that this church is infallibly led by the Holy Spirit? Or and to be fair, there's some nuance in there. I shouldn't just definitively say that they believe everything that the church is infallible, because that isn't true. But is that
we see the fruit? We see the fruit of the tree, and it needs to be cast down and cast into the fire.
Exactly, and it's been that way for a long time, right? There's been even like Erasmus, right? Erasmus didn't even leave the church. He wanted true reformation in the sense that he wanted to reform it from the inside, right? That was like 600-700 years ago. I can't remember exactly when Erasmus lived off the top of my head, but that was a very long time ago. This isn't new. It's just getting more and more blatant in ways that it has gotten in the past. But, with the existence of things like technology and globalism, everything that's rearing its ugly head is getting worse, right? Yeah, it did happen in the past, but you couldn't live stream it to China from New York City 2,000 years ago or 500 years ago or whatever it happens to be. Obviously, in the case of Erasmus, I think it's about 700 years ago. But nonetheless, you get the idea, right?
Yep. Perfect. Can we get back right on the article?
Yeah, absolutely. According to veteran Vatican journalist John L. Allen Jr., the Vatican has spared no efforts in its attempts to woo Beijing to full diplomatic relations, a key priority of the Francis papacy. And of course, we read the article yesterday that talked about how this is really just the Jesuitical ideal of missiology, right?
That's missiology is the study of mission work. So
exactly.
It's their approach to missionary work.
Exactly. The Vatican is, quote, covetous of a relationship with China and often apparently willing to stifle objections and give away a great deal, end quote, in order to move toward the goal, Allen wrote last month. And just to give context, I believe this article, I'm going to check real quick. I'm pretty sure it was written like 5-ish days ago.
Oh, okay.
No, sorry, June. My apologies. I misread this. Definitely. This was read in June. But it was this year.
You might have had me show the date on this yesterday, or was that a different article? So here it is, June 23rd of June, 2020. But it is current in the grand scheme of our rabbit hole of rabbit holes.
Right. And the reason why I think that was important to note there is just says when he says last month. So that would mean in May. John Allen wrote this article that they were just quoting in May of this year, 2020.
So we're talking about the Roman spirit, and it's interesting, this word covetous that is translated from whatever the Chinese man said, unless he uses English because he's a businessman. He might have wrote covetous.
Well, I think that one was actually John Allen. So he'd be an English speaker.
John, according to journal, it has no effort to... Okay, I mean, they could have been more clear on that because the whole article is about a whistleblower. I mean, I do see how they mentioned it was John Allen, but they should have been more blatantly clear for people to follow because generally we think they're giving us quotes from a whistleblower.
Right.
But about critiquing the article, so let's keep it up. But yeah, I just want to mention that word covetous there, spiritually.
Absolutely. In short, quote, the Vatican is moving full steam ahead in its courtship of Beijing, with the ultimate prize remaining full diplomatic relations, a secure legal standing for the church, and partnerships on the global stage, end quote. Just one more time so you guys get the idea. Quote, the Vatican is moving full steam ahead in a courtship of Beijing, with the ultimate prize remaining full diplomatic relations, a secure legal standing for the church, and partnerships on the global stage, end quote, Allen wrote.
Oh, and did specify who said this quote was Allen wrote last month. It specified afterward. Okay. So I've been a little overwhelmed. I need hiatus, so I'm not performing at my top right now, but that's okay because this is CJ's show.
Well, and to be fair, perhaps. Well, I don't know. I mean, we'll be good. We'll be good. We're
good. I'm just saying I'm not in my top a moment to perform at my best right now. So that's all I'm saying. Let's go on.
Well, and I think I speak for the whole crowd when I say we appreciate you anyway, Nicholas. Absolutely.
And I'll read this so we keep on topic because this is like the key of the whole article, and I don't want to distract it. I'd like to move on from straight reading it, have it right on our minds. In short, the Vatican is moving full steam ahead in its courtship of Beijing, with the ultimate prize remaining full diplomatic relations, a secure legal standing for the church, and partnerships on the global stage, Allen wrote.
Exactly. And by the way, I would like to point out in the next paragraph, you see, right, the Vatican's 2018 overture to Beijing was sweetened by the May 2020 launch of a, ready for this? New Chinese edition of the Jesuit edited journal, Civilita Catholica. Jesuits tend to come up a lot in these conversations, right?
Which it enjoys a semi-official Vatican status, Allen noted.
Right, exactly, right. So, and that's I mean, I certainly hope, bare minimum, I hope that I can get everybody here to have a healthy distrust of the Jesuits. At max, of course, I would like people to realize that the organization that is the Catholic Church is evil and needs to be left. But
it's the horror of revelation.
Exactly.
Just to keep it scriptural and useful.
Exactly. Thank you, Brother Nicholas. It is the horror of revelation. It is the fallen woman, the one that was married to Christ but fell and committed what is nothing more than a spiritual adultery against her husband. Right. By the way, I don't mean to just pick on the Catholics in that regard, because the rest of the world's organizational churches seem to be doing that as well. I'm sure it's not every single one of them, right? But the Orthodox,
she is the mother of whores.
Exactly. And that's actually what I was just about to say. The Orthodox split from the Catholics. The Lutherans split from the Catholics. So on and so forth. In other words, it is this mother whore, and then these other groups, which are also being whores. They are also committing a spiritual adultery against their husband, who's Christ, right? Who do they come from? They come from the mother whore. Who's the mother whore? Vatican, right? And I don't know if we necessarily need to read the entire article. If you'd like to continue with the whole article, we can. There is one thing I wanted to point out about China and Francis, which is that Pope Francis did actually recognize 7 bishops in China who were state appointed. So he is fulfilling his end of the bargain.
Okay, well, let's see that when we get there. I'll just read it because without us stopping.
Okay.
Because there's just so much insight into how things work and how to see these things in a realistic way. There's just so much insight in this article that it's really kind of like somewhat of a crash course for the audience. So for that reason, I want to read it.
Absolutely.
So La Civilta Catholica said the new edition is meant as a gesture of friendship, given the increasingly important role that the Chinese language plays in the contemporary world within the global context. Mr. Allen's appraisal of the Vatican's courtship of China squares with that of other Vatican watchers, with what other Vatican watchers have been observing as well. Francis dreams of being the Pope who will establish diplomatic relations with Beijing, and to achieve this goal, he is willing to make concessions, declared Vatican analyst Albin Mikosi on French television last December. Pope Francis is a prudent man, Mikosi said. He pursues a dream to be the sovereign pontiff who will restore relations between China and the Vatican. In order to do this, he is ready to make a few concessions. Say nothing about Hong Kong. Do not get too excited when the Chinese leader talks about rewriting the Bible, he added, in reference to announcements that the Chinese Communist Party intends to retranslate the Bible and other sacred texts to make them conform to socialist ideology. Because of this overreaching desire, Mikosi said, the Pope is willing to turn a blind eye to the CCP's violations of religious liberty and other human rights issues. The Pope is willing to turn a blind eye because of his desire to the Chinese Communist Party's violations of religious liberties and other human rights issues. Whew. Last November, for instance, during an in-flight press conference during his return flight from Asia, the Pope reiterated his desire to visit China while dodging questions about the Hong Kong pro-democracy protests. I would like to go to Beijing, Francis said. I love China. According to Makosi, the Pope's silence on Hong Kong suggests that he will go to great lengths not to offend the Chinese Communist Party. The Pope has lavished fulsome praise on China, insisting that China's communist government protects religious freedom and that churches are full. So he is saying that he's not insisting like, I demand you do this. He's insisting that is what's happening. Meanwhile, the Chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, the Argentinian Bishop Marcelo Sanchez Sorondo, has held up communist China as the best model for living out Catholic social teaching today.
And there's a reason. There's a
Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, the Chancellor of the Pontifical. Is that papic basically?
Pontiff.
Okay, so the papacy's Academy of Social Sciences, and he's the Bishop of Argentina. Might be what they mean by this. Argentinian Bishop Marcelo Sanchez Sorondo, or a bishop in Argentina. His diocese is in Argentina, probably is what that means.
Real quick, I should correct myself real quick, because the word pontiff itself is actually just a word for a priest. Typically, when in the modern day, when people use the word pontiff, it is referring to the Pope. So I just want to be specific so that the audience, gets a clear understanding.
Well, yeah, I need that clear understanding even more because I'm on this side of the microphone.
Right.
So in modern phraseology, it sounds like it's talking about the Pope. Technically, it's saying priestly. About the papacy, technically, it's saying priestly Academy of Social Sciences, but probably the Pope's Academy of Social Sciences, basically, the papacy's Argentinian bishop held up communist China as the best model for living out Catholic social teaching today. I mean, that's just crazy because we have this Marxist thing going on here. So we know the Catholics are on that side. And like, I haven't heard anything about the Catholics really supporting it. I guess it's better for them to just, let Big Eva do that. And then they don't really need Catholics citing for Marxism for it to take over this country. But this is just the craziest thing I've ever heard.
Well, I would point out
China as the best model for living out Catholic social teaching today. I mean, remember what Brother CJ was just saying about having to choose.
Exactly. Well, and I would point out too, right? Jorge Mario Bergoglio, known now as Pope Francis, right, was also an Argentinian bishop and was also a socialist or communist, whichever word you'd like to use. He refers to himself as a socialist. He does mean communism. Really, people who refer to themselves as socialists typically do mean they want to stop at the transitional state in between capitalism and communism, which Karl Marx defined as socialism. And they do deserve the respect of being held in their own accord. But
anyone who's in the Marxist nonsense, I mean, there's no respect for that. I mean, it's like saying nonsense needs to be respected, that it's not this lie. It's like, I don't know. I mean, respect isn't quite the right word. Just like Marxism is very satanic. The
Absolutely.
Spirit of Satan or some underling of Satan is totally where Marxism comes from. Marx himself wrote in one of his Satanist poems, "I will howl curses at mankind." And so, he knew what spiritual connection he was in and what he was doing. And so this whole thing is it's very satanic. People want to separate this politics and stuff, there's no separation. Doing evil, satanic. Having thoughts that are so opposed to Christ, satanic. Having the thoughts of Satan as the child of Satan, as the so-called Pope, satanic, anti-Christ.
That's 100% accurate. And the thing we need to understand too, when it comes to Marxism itself, right, is that Marxism is one of the most deceiving versions of that. There's a video floating around YouTube from one of these philosophy channels. I can't remember the name of it. Maybe it's a good idea that I don't anyways. But he goes on about Marxism, right? And I kid you not, this is a direct quote from the man. When he explains the Marxist ideal, he says, "This is in its own way as beautiful as the image of Jesus in paradise, but a great deal more realistic." Do you see what the Marxist is trying to put themselves up against? They're saying, yeah, no, I get your whole religious ideal there, but we can actually do that for real here on earth. So you should
I will make myself like the Most High. I will sit on the side of the north, or the furthest of the north, the edge of the north. Now, if you go to the edge of the north, where is that going to take you? Well, first you get to the North Pole, and then you go infinitely like above Earth, right? And I think that's likely after Christ ascended. If there is a spatial direction that he went to be at the Father's right hand, I think it would be the north, because the north is the same direction at all times, and so is the south. It would have to be one of those two for him to be in a specific direction where we could know what direction he's in, you know? Anything not North Pole or South Pole would like constantly be shifting from our perspective. And considering the scripture refers to God as being at the furthest of the north, yeah, that's what I'm inclined to. That's just kind of a fun little thought anyway.
Well, yeah, and I would just want to point out real quick, we were talking here about this Argentine bishop, Marcelo Sorondo, right? And I pointed out that the current pope is also a Argentine and is also a socialist, right? But little did you know that these two are actually allies of each other. And of course, why wouldn't they be? They're from the exact same country and the exact same church with the exact same ideology.
And right? they both rose in the same era, so they were in with the same people in order to rise.
Exactly. And I have a article in front of me now that I just want to use, because I know they are allies. I want to see when exactly they became allies, just to give you guys an idea of like how long they've been working together. So just one moment.
So I haven't been watching chat, but I think Sergeant Jim probably agrees with us a lot, and yet he's here listening because I've asked that we be allowed to focus and stuff. I really appreciate that. Sergeant Slim Jim is on our side against the Cuties movie, just the exact opposite of the gentleman I talked about earlier who really disturbed me. And so welcome, Sergeant Slim Jim. Yeah, all this Catholic stuff, I'll be honest with you, Jim, this Catholic stuff is makes it a bit difficult for me to parse out individuals, I mean, I hope you're a brother of ours, or and all that. But either way, we're good friends at this point. And if you're on that side of that issue, then I don't care how much we disagree and fight about yeah, I mean, even if you are being Catholic, even though it's evil, you're clearly not okay with evil. And so I would like you not to like push you now or anything, but just in the long run over the next months or something, just be really honest about this and be sure that you're following Christ and that you don't have cultural boundaries that are withholding you from doing that, So, yeah, but thanks for being here and thanks for being cool about being in the chat while we say all this about your stuff. Because, yeah, I don't want a distraction. So,
well, and I did just find what I was looking for. So, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. The Bishop Marcelo Sanchez Sorondo and Jorge Mario Bergoglio, who is now known as Pope Francis, were born in the same city. They knew each other for an undisclosed period of time, but according to Sorondo, before the two of them were priests, and they worked together on the 2007 Fifth Episcopal Conference of Latin America and the Caribbean, which is 6 years before Bergoglio ever became Pope Francis. And I'll send you that article, Brother Nicholas.
Okay, am I just going to link that one? I mean, it sounds like it's not controversial and we don't need to like prove it or anything. We can just offer the link real quick.
Yeah, exactly. It's not something we need to go into in depth. It's just to show that this man who is now, putting up communist China as the best way to be Catholic is an ally of the current Pope.
Okay, yeah, so that is pretty important. So you got to put that source in there.
All right, and so just a moment. I was looking it up on my phone, so I'm going to have to email it to myself so I can copy the link and then email it to you. Well, just look at that. Either way, let's get into because there is another point I want to look at. And since that one is just one that we're going to put in the description, I can, hold on that for a little bit. So I'm going to
I really want to throw it in side chat, but
okay. So the article I'm sending you right now, put that one on the screen because that's the one we're going to look at next. And then the article I'm going to send you here in just a second is the one to put in live chat that shows Bergoglio and this current I keep forgetting it, Sarando.
It's gonna be so zoomed in. I don't know, it unzoomed me. Okay. So Pope Francis recognizes 7 bishops in China. And then I was an anarcho-capitalist libertarian before I converted, Jim. And I definitely think a lot of I believe God tells us like the best form of government, that like rather than having government be way above coming down on everyone, the main government is fathers of houses. And that's the basis of it all.
All right. And I just got, by the way, the article to put in the live chat sent to you. So it should be pop up. There it is.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, it's interesting. I have, for my whole life, actually, I got slightly less right wing as time went on. When I was very young, I actually got it in my head the divine right of kings was a good idea. And so I became a pretty solid monarchist. And I have since become, by the time I was a junior in high school, I kind of thought that was a ridiculous idea. And since then, I've been a constitutionalist, politically speaking. But the thing about being a constitutionalist, is that really the only thing that actually means is that you believe in the Constitution as a viable system of government. You know what I mean? It's not really so much as like you can, to an extent, you can even be like, use constitutionalist as an adjective to describe some other form of governmental belief. But nonetheless, I won't get too deep into that because
because my political inclination is simply that we proclaim the kingdom of God, and then that has a good influence on earthly politics. And earthly governments, they have the sword, and they're only doing the right thing with it when they do it according to the law of God. Just an example for the audience. I think I mentioned this to you in private yesterday, CJ. But there's a pretty famous example is the fence around the roof. And people say like, well, because we're not on our roofs, we don't have a fence around our roof. And yet we're still perfectly keeping that bit of Torah because the intention is what's being expressed there. It's not about being stupidly hyper specific. That's not what Torah is. Torah is like, you read it the way it's intended to be read. I'll just be simple about it. So we have rails around our balconies, and if there is a roof that people go on sometimes, there's going to be some kind of wall around it and stuff, that's probably like chest high to most people, but you can still look over the wall, that kind of thing. But here's the thing is people get fined for building code violations, but that's against Torah. So our government is sinning by fining people for building code violations. Instead, what it does in Torah is sets up negligence so that, for instance, if you did not have a fence around your roof and someone fell off and died, it would be blood for blood. So it would be considered essentially murder by negligence at that point. And the Torah is clear on that. And so, yeah, all this overregulation and stuff really is just supposed to be that people are held responsible enough that things are brought in line in a real way. You know, that's why Torah is a schoolmaster, right? But the way our government does it, that's not a schoolmaster at all. It's just a babysitter.
Right.
Different.
What did
So that's just an example of, since we're talking politics so much and stuff, I'm just saying that to me, our politics is the kingdom of God. And it's really as simple as that. And we speak, we proclaim the kingdom. And so that's how we have that good political influence. So things about the Constitution that are good because Christ has influenced the world, that's a good stuff, a good thing and all that. And so, yeah, but my political stance is definitely the kingdom of heaven. It's as simple as that for me.
Well, and I certainly do agree to that too, just because, you know, if we do, obviously, I mean, I would even go as far as to say if Christians really did live perfectly Christian, then a government wouldn't even be necessary. But of course, we live in our fallen world, so that won't happen. But the idea does still, you know, hold true that if we are proclaiming Messiah and the kingdom of God, then that does bleed into everything. I mean, it bleeds not only into your government, but it bleeds into your education. It bleeds into your entertainment. It bleeds into the way that you talk to friends. You know, I mean, it really bleeds into everything.
Yeah, and that's why I encourage fully recognizing God's truth. And that means agreeing with Christ about Torah. And then this has nothing to do with keeping Torah for salvation or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's written, we're saved by grace through faith unto good works, which were before ordained. And so the unto good works is the exact same model for me as for you. I just say that the good works are written in Torah, but we see the salvation is unto the good works. So I will get really annoyed if people try to accuse me of being legalist or something just because I say the right thing to do is what God said was the right thing to do. And if when we think that the law hanging on love means that we've been made the judge, we get it totally wrong. That means that what's written in Torah, all that stuff is love.
Well, and so with that, got a good, nice political conversation in there. I think we could jump right into this article here.
Yep.
Pope Francis recognizes 7 bishops in China. The Vatican and Beijing have announced a historic provisional agreement on the appointment of bishops in China, but critics say the deal weakens the Catholic Church's moral authority. That is definitely saying the least, although I would argue that they never really had any moral authority to begin with. That said, where's the date? I can't find the date on this article. Can you find the date on this article, brother, or is it just not showing it?
I don't think give me a moment. Let me see. I'll scroll down further where it might give us something towards the bottom. I mean, we do see a copyright 2020 on the web page. Yeah, I'm not seeing a date. And then what source is this even? Oh, here, finally found it. 220918. So that's September 22nd, 2018, 2 years ago.
So this is like directly after the provisional agreement was signed. That's good. That's good. That's very, very close to the situation. All right. By the way, the source here is called DW.com.
Made for Minds. Well, you guys can check it out and see what DW means. I don't want to distract us yet again. Let's continue.
And I should be fair in pointing out this is one of the few articles we're going to be using where, and so is this Breitbart one. In fact, this episode is a little bit different from other episodes in the sense that we're not using directly Vatican sources, whereas we have been so far before.
The first link I'm putting out right now is to this article. Then I'm putting it in the side chat, so that for people who are watching it today, they don't have to wait for me to buckle down and get all these into descriptions. I'm totally emotionally exhausted, guys. Yeah, all this stuff with the Cuties movie and what's going on with like people's minds going to an even worse place than they were already at. It's really, really heavy on me. Okay, let me get this in the description here. So then this is the previous one we were looking at, the Breitbart article. Okay, brother CJ, let's whatever you're ready to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna go ahead and try and jump into the article just because I do have work today, unfortunately, so I might have to kind of cut this off a little abruptly in about 20 minutes. So I want to go ahead and jump right into the article. But really quick, I do want to say, just for the audience, just so you guys are aware, this fight that keeps coming up, right, in this episode and in other episodes of this, and in some of the stuff I've been getting in about cuties, just join it, please, because this is the most serious life has ever gotten in this country, right? And obviously there's there's
we can't let it become normalized. We can't let that happen. Oh, well, so much is at stake for so many children. And children, I mean, it's easy to just think of children as not being that many. They're the people who are children right now, right? But new children are born all the time. They're only children for a short time. It's something that every American human passes through that phase of life. This is huge.
Exactly. And this should really be one of the biggest priorities for all of us, both on and off of YouTube. So I just hope I can stress that to all of the brothers in the chat. Anybody who may not be a Christian in the chat.
And sisters. We get a lot of sisters who watch, especially live anyway. Maybe more the people who watch later are brothers, but yeah, brothers and sisters, brethren.
Exactly. With that.
But especially brothers, though. I mean, we have responsibility to guard as men. So it's like when when an attack like this comes on the children of your country, and the children of your land, this attack comes and you're willing to do nearly nothing about it, that's doing less than what you have to do as a man before God. And you'll be accountable to that. I mean, not everyone's in the same place I am to speak up as much as I am and stuff. But if you're not doing your part in your place, Christ, he's going to have a talk with you when that day comes.
Amen. I completely agree. I couldn't have said it better myself. We as men are supposed to be, the protectors.
Yeah, and there's reason for this too. Because I mean, women do the day-to-day thing. Like if you think of ancient Israel, women had to do the day-to-day thing. The house had to run. There's no option for like things to not run, right? You don't want to go hungry, wake up exhausted the next morning. I mean, you don't want to. It was a survival kind of life, compared to now. Maybe somewhat akin to the American frontier, but with more social connection. Like as far as like living on the land and like really having to follow through with these things, a kind of pressure that we do not understand and coddled pet of the state society that we live in now, where we're like the state's pets,
Mm-hmm.
But it was a lot different back then. And so the house had to be run and then other things had to be handled. So you had to have the two people, each one doing their job. You couldn't be like two people on this job sometimes, two people on that job sometimes. That doesn't work, right? And so married women, like, yeah, there's the two different roles. And then single women, like, speaking up in things is good, but the role God has made for and made us more expert at and stuff, like really supporting things and just support and encouragement and keeping spiritually in the right place and being a good influence on all the men, But, how can a man be as humble as a man's supposed to be when, like, we don't even have women to be as humble as a man is supposed to be, and they're supposed to be, like, more humble than that here in our church spot, So, yeah, I'm sorry if that's offensive to some people, but we don't want to try to push ourselves into positions. Like the position I'm in, I didn't try to push myself into it. I just keep being honest every day and doing what I honestly think is best, So, but yeah, men, we really have a responsibility about this cuties thing. And I know that's like a tangent, but it's a rabbit hole of rabbit holes. So just consider every tangent that we're living up to the title.
That is true. Well, and to be fair, it is important. I mean, let's be perfectly frank, right? This is something that is not only in our political sphere and in our entertainment sphere, but it was originally, before it was in the entertainment sphere in Hollywood and before it was in the political sphere in Washington, it was in churches and specifically the Catholic Church. But, and atheists talk about this frequently, and we should talk about it more as Christians so that we get the trash out. There's a lot of big Eva who covers this stuff up too.
Yeah, and I focused that. I don't know if you had time to watch my whole video about Jen Aldrich, but I called out our big Eva there also.
Yeah, and I actually did not get the chance to watch that yet. I will have to, but I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, but there's just no way we can call out atheists and not call out Christians who are being. They're not at that point. It's not Christianity anymore. At that point, we're seeing who's who.
Exactly. Amen. I completely agree.
And this is a time when it's becoming obvious who's who, And yeah, that's why I was like reaching out to Jim. Like, I hope you'll consider these things over sometime, because it looks like it's becoming obvious which side of this you're on. And we would like to just like welcome you here in our community to be really fully in that, just my honesty on it. So let's go ahead and introduce this article, and I guess we'll do one more day about China.
All right. Yeah, and our last day about China, we'll just talk the message of Pope Francis, and then also the One Belt, One Road, and kind of just wrap it up there.
And so maybe that won't even be our last day because One Belt, One Road's a big topic. So we'll just find out. We'll just find out. But at least now I have a good idea of what to title tomorrow's episode. So let's introduce this, and then we'll wrap it up there. Maybe we can even do this in like the next 4 minutes and keep it 10 minutes short. You and I can have a little time to talk. Yesterday's was 20 minutes long, so.
Right. All right, so Pope Francis recognizes the 7 bishops in China. I'm just going to read the top portion for you guys again. The Vatican and Beijing have announced a historic provisional agreement on the appointment of bishops in China, and critics say the deal weakens the Catholic Church's moral authority. Pope Francis on Saturday endorsed the legitimacy of 7 Chinese bishops appointed by Beijing without the Vatican's approval. Now, what they mean by that is originally, I know that sentence was written somewhat confusingly, but they have Vatican approval now. When they were originally appointed, they were appointed by Beijing without Vatican approval. That's what the sentence is trying to say.
Yeah, and then Pope Francis personally endorsed it before Vatican approval had time to red tape through, is probably what that's basically saying.
Exactly. This is Francis's personal agenda as the pontiff. Not necessarily, and we even pointed that out.
Well, specifically endorsed means it was his personal words.
Well, and I think the reason why it's kind of important to point a lot of that stuff out is because we have pointed out, with Cardinal Zen, for example, he is not in any way, shape, or form on. I hope he makes the full decisions that I want him to make, of course, but he's been very critical of Pope Francis. Obviously, there's been Cardinal Burke and Cardinal Dolan who have been very critical of Pope Francis. The point being that, there is a certain level of, even amongst the higher ups, there is a certain level of strife about these issues. And we hope, of course, that that's because these people will leave the church. That's what I want to see. I want Josephson to leave the Catholic Church.
Well, Revelation does talk about come out of her, my people. And,
Exactly.
if they get excommunicated and continue to be Christian.
Exactly. And so anyway, I'll stop there so I can get back to because I don't want to go on a rant too much. We do have limited time.
Yeah, tomorrow's the day for rants on this.
The decision is part of a historic accord between the Catholic Church and China over the nomination of bishops, which is normally a papal prerogative. The issue has strained ties between the two for decades. The provisional agreement was signed in Beijing and announced while Francis was visiting Lithuania at the start of a 4-day trip to Baltic countries. Pope Francis hopes that, quote, Pope Francis hopes that these decisions, a new process may begin that will allow the wounds of the past to be overcome and will lead to full communion of all Chinese Catholics, end quote, the Vatican said in a statement. Recognition rumored for months. Media reports for months that Pope Francis was ready to accept the legitimacy of several bishops appointed by the Chinese government in order to restore diplomatic relations between Beijing and the Vatican, which were frozen in 1951. The Wall Street Journal reported earlier this year that Beijing authorities would likely give the Pope veto powers on future bishop appointments, although this has not been confirmed. By the way, this is a factor of time. We obviously read for you yesterday in an article that came out after this that this has been confirmed. So at the time this article was written, it had not been confirmed. But Pope Francis will have veto power over some of these bishops. So they have to agree, basically. The Chinese Communist Party and Pope Francis have to agree on the bishops, right? Under the deal, 2 Vatican-aligned Chinese bishops recognized by the Pope have been asked by a top Vatican diplomat to resign in favor of state-sanctioned prelates. So, I mean, there you have a perfect example, right? Francis and the church itself selling out loyal to the Vatican bishops, right? So that they can make a dictatorial and evil atheistic state happy.
Oh, and then the point of that is like, because they want to be sure that the Vatican's not like infiltrating them. So they wanted to get rid of those two. Like, hey, if you're saying we can trust you, then you don't need to force us to have these 2 people around, right?
Well, it's a little bit of that. It's also a little bit of these 2 bishops in particular, much like Cardinal Zen. They're a lot more traditional, right? They do believe, even though...
Okay, so Vatican aligned isn't speaking of like underneath in the smoke-filled room. They're officially Vatican aligned.
Exactly.
Okay. Good clarity there.
And of course, it's funny. They used to say back in the day, well, is the Pope Catholic? And, I don't know. Maybe you don't know anymore. But that's obviously just a joke. At any rate,
Catholic means universal for the universal church, then no, the Pope is not Catholic.
Oh, I mean, that is fair, right? The Wall Street Journal, I just want to jump back in, sorry. The Wall Street Journal reported earlier this year that, nope, sorry, I already read that. Under the deal, already read that too.
Below the picture.
Yes, sir. Thank you. An 8th Beijing appointed bishop who died last year will also be recognized after he expressed the desire to be reconciled with the Apostolic See, the Vatican said. China's 12 million Catholics make up just a tiny portion of the country's 1.4 billion population. Millions of them have remained loyal to the Vatican despite the Chinese government creating its own state-sanctioned Catholic Church in 1957, which has appointed its own bishops ever since. And
so they're really selling out the Catholics there, because the Catholics even were given a fake Catholic church, and they like went underground to follow the Roman Catholic Church instead. And after being that devoted, and some of them probably died over it and stuff, now they've been sold out by the Pope.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And then this is
disgusting.
It is a putrid thing. And what people need to understand with that is, because of course the Pope is, with all of this, selling out Christians who are outside of the Catholic sphere by forcing them to have to either be under the auspices of the Catholic Church or have an illegal religion. But he's also selling out his own constituents in a very real way.
Well, that's more of a trade than a. Well, what do you mean by constituents? I was thinking you meant like his cronies or that sort of thing. But you mean like the people he's supposed to be protecting, huh?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I was mishearing that. Yeah. I mean, just the way that they were willing to like risk their lives, and probably many people died when all they had to do was, I mean, they were willing to die for the option to not have their Catholic Church be China-fied, and now like they've just been totally sold out to like there is no Catholic Church to not be China-fied. That's the goal. I mean, what happens when these people who refuse to go along with this in China make an underground Catholic Church? I mean, that will like, I guess it won't be quote Catholic anymore, and like so they'll be coming out of her too. I mean, these people who refuse the state-sanctioned Catholic Church ever since 1957. Here we are. Was it 60? Yeah, 60 years later. And when this church goes state sanctioned, they're going to come out of her. So that's good news.
Well, and this is why I compare it to, similarly to the Protestant Reformation or the Great Schism, in that at those times, right, in those moments, although the movements became corrupted, in those moments, people left because they realized this body has gained so much corruption over the years that it's not salvageable. The body itself didn't improve, by which I mean the Catholic Church, but people are once again realizing it, right? They're once again realizing, hey, this is not okay.
After the Protestant Reformation, I think in a lot of ways, the evil infiltration within the Catholic Church lost ground, and I think it probably did improve in a lot of ways for a while, and now this is going back to the status quo that's been sleeping for 500 years.
Well, and isn't it funny, right? What is the original purpose of Jesuits? Counter-Reformation, right? So, that's just this.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, are we close enough to the end to just finish it real quick? Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and do that. But that's a good point to end. I mean, that brought it right back around. Wow. So, okay. Go ahead, brother.
So, Catholics harassed and jailed. Many Vatican-supporting churchgoers, meanwhile, have been obliged to worship underground and have faced harassment and imprisonment. Human rights groups have labeled the agreement a sellout by the Vatican at a time when Beijing is waging the most systemic oppression of Christianity in decades.
So they're talking about right when they wrote this article here, right?
Yeah.
So this is saying exactly what I said. So it's already happening that like Vatican supporting, that's kind of a funny way to put it because it sounds like they're not supporting this Vatican. Meanwhile, been obliged to worship underground. Yeah, and when underground worship is obvious, when it becomes obvious that that's not Roman Catholic worship, then they will be out of her.
Exactly. Chinese president, the Grand Poobah himself, Xi Jinping, is trying, to infuse all religions in China with the Chinese characteristics such as loyalty to the Communist Party, academics have argued, although this is only slightly true. The only one he has actually made deals with is Catholicism. Everybody at this point is now, I don't know if the article writer was aware of this at the time, but in 2020, we're all fully aware of how the Chinese government is dealing with Uyghur Muslims and with Protestant Christians, right? And it is certainly not trying to link up with them. It is persecution.
Yeah, because Rome is of the world, so they have common ground to link up on.
Exactly. Exactly. Over the last few months, local governments across China have shut down hundreds of private Christian house churches.
Okay, so that's in quotes because Catholics are like saying that that's not real church because of their weird rules and stuff. I mean, that's a joke. House church is like the most straight up biblical kind of church there is, you know?
Right, it was the original one. That's what the apostles were doing.
Oh, house churches. I mean, do you see how unscriptural that spirit of Rome is?
Well,
So,
with that does end the article there. You guys see, I mean, we've.
I almost just want to not distract and just end the episode now. I think like everything's really solid in the mind with where we just got, and this is a perfect ending.
Well, and you know what? That may end up probably helping me out too, because it is 59, and I guess I do probably got to get pretty abrupt. So
Yeah, so I'm going to do a very short prayer. Brother CJ, prayer is your regular thing when you start the shows. I say just trust Messiah all the time and stuff, but if you can try to help us remember, I'll try to help us remember too. Or if the audience can try to help us remember at the start of the episode, just all caps us in the side chat. You didn't pray. Do you see side chat when we're doing this, CJ?
yeah, I do.
Okay, I don't because I'm always looking at the other screen. So yeah, you guys can let CJ know in all caps, you forgot to pray. But let's go real quick. Father, who is in sky, hallowed is your name. Your kingdom come, and your will be done here on earth as it is in sky. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Do not lead us into temptation, into testing, but deliver us from evil. Because yours is the power, the kingdom, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Hallelujah.
So just trust Messiah.